Welcome to the Rich Mind Podcast.
Trust me, I do it all the time.
Yep.
I do it all the time. So, man, dude, this is going to be so exciting. I mentioned in the previous episode, if you caught this one, folks, here just the last week, I mentioned that we are on the verge of doing something exciting here on the Rich Mind Podcast. And today's the day. Today's the day we're going to bring on the brand new co-host of the Rich Mind Podcast. And I'm super excited to introduce him to you right now. And if you're watching this on video, you can already see him. But anyways, he's been a longtime friend of the podcast. Super excited about the conversations, the creativity, the help that we're going to offer you, the listeners, moving forward. It's super exciting. But man, Greg Junge, welcome to the show, man. Welcome to being a co-host of the Rich Mind Podcast.
Yeah, thank you, Randy. I appreciate it, man. And I really appreciate the extension of the co-host position here. Obviously, I've been friends with you for a long time and a follower of the podcast, so I'm really looking forward to being on the other side of the microphone with you. It's going to be a lot of fun.
So people are listening. I mentioned you a lot in the podcast, if you haven't noticed, especially probably lately, right? Because we have our bi-weekly calls. They were weekly there for a while, but bi-weekly for sure. How much has that been good for you? I can imagine, or I can remember back when you even just asked me to start doing that. And I was like, really? You want to jump on a call with me? What in the world for? But yeah, it's been super fun to be able to stay connected. And I just decided, hey, let's see if we can't just hop on, hit record our conversations, because that's really basically how I want this to be, and just see what we can create. So I appreciate you at least doing that for me. We're coming up on 2 years, right? Isn't that right? 2 years?
Yeah, 2 years for that call. And I don't know what even sparked that question of like, hey, let's hop on a call every week. But I'm totally glad we did, because it obviously, built our friendship a lot stronger. It held us accountable for things that we said we're going to do. And, obviously we just talk about ideas as friends do, and, some crazy ideas that are really out there, and then some more practical ideas that we talk about. So yeah, it's been great for me, and I'm sure it's been great for you as well. And, that's kind of where it started, and look where it's taken us. Yeah, look where it's taken us. I mean, it was a business conference that we were attending down in Nashville. Is that right? Where we knew of each other because we've been in other masterminds. And so we are familiar with each other with Zoom, meaning we were on different calls, right? But we didn't really know each other from a friend standpoint. Let's maybe put it that way. But we attended that conference down in Nashville. Is that right? Am I thinking of that right? I think Nashville, like you said, I think we met in Dallas at one of the mastermind events.
That's right.
But I think Nashville is, I invited you to that one event, and then we hung out, and it was a great weekend. We had a lot of fun and learned a lot, but I think that's where we really solidified, our friendship and our business mindedness, moving forward and everything. And that's where the weekly calls came from. And it's just been great from there.
Yeah, at that conference, we were trying to go down that rabbit trail of figuring out how to acquire businesses, which that's good. It's not neither good or bad, right? It's a great strategy, great idea. We haven't necessarily, actually you did. Maybe we can dig into that at some point down the road with the podcast. I think you actually did acquire something with somebody else. But anyways, that was the beginning part, I think, of the conversation is we were trying to figure out that strategy, right? Together. We were trying to figure out how to do it, when to do it, all that kind of stuff that comes along with that. There's tons of content out there nowadays with folks talking about that, acquiring boring businesses, I think is how they say it, right? Which is great and it's accurate. But yeah, I think that's what really brought us together was that common theme of trying to build a business, figure out how to even buy a business if possible. And it's trying to figure that out, navigate those pieces. I think that's been probably the biggest catalyst for us to keep going from week to week, or now, like I said, I know it's bi-weekly now, but yeah, definitely a continuous basis.
Yeah, exactly. And that conference, let alone going to those kind of conferences is great, but when you go there by yourself, it's a little, I don't want to say intimidating, but you're learning all the information. But when I was there with you, we were both learning the information and we were processing it probably very differently. And then we would, grab dinner. Yeah, exactly. We would, grab dinner and then talk about, this module or this aspect of owning a business. And it really gave me the different perspective aside from just learning from the presenter, because the presenter is there to, present the information. Sometimes they're there to sell you information. So having a conversation with you, it really brought me back to the ground level of oh yeah, Randy's seeing things a little bit differently. Maybe I should be open-minded and, say, hey, he's looking at it this way. I didn't see that point of view. So just going to a conference or even talking to somebody about a specific business idea or a conference, can be very valuable. And that's what I really took out of Nashville.
And that's a perfect segue into what and why I wanted you to come on as a co-host. I mentioned once again in that teaser a little bit about bringing you on is that I think we have similar ideas, similar aspirations, but our beliefs or our thoughts, the way we look at things might be a little different, which I think the contrast between we've got common goals, we've got common visions for business and for family and legacy, right? Health, wealth, and legacy. That's kind of the pillars we have on the podcast. But you're the contrast that you bring to me, right? You can challenge me. Vice versa. I can challenge you with some of my thoughts. And that's kind of the idea. I want to have a dialogue back and forth, not a push and shove. That almost sounds like confrontational. That's not what I mean. But at the same time, just a little bit more of a challenge, right? Push back a little bit. You can challenge me, push back, same thing. We want to challenge the listener. One thing that was big for me, and that's the reason why I created the podcast, I wanted to create something that if I was early on in my stage of the entrepreneurial journey, of the personal development journey, I wanted to be the go-to source that you could listen from beginning to end and just start plugging in information, and then start taking action, and then start seeing some fantastic results. But yeah, the contrast between ourselves, right, I think is going to be a great dynamic moving forward. So take just a couple of minutes. You've been, I think, 3 as far as the guests in the past. So if there are, you don't need to go into a lot of detail, but same time, go into it, share a little bit more about yourself, where you're from, where you're at. We talked a little bit about the business stuff there for a couple seconds, but yeah, just take a couple minutes and let everybody get to know you a little bit better.
Yeah, sure. So, I was born and raised in New York. I'm a proud New Yorker. I went to school in Arizona, University of Arizona.
I got to interrupt you. I'm sorry. Jets, Mets, Islanders.
That's right. Mets, Jets, and Islanders.
That means something to some people, right? Out there in the world, that means something to New Yorkers. It didn't mean anything to me, and it might not mean anything to you out there listening right now. But anyways, I just wanted to interject because I love that. Jets, Mets, Islanders, or Yankees.
Giants and Rangers.
Giants, yeah. Anyways, sorry I interrupted. Please continue.
No, you're good. I love the fact that you love that so much.
I do. I love that. I love that story about you.
But yeah, I went to college in Arizona, University of Arizona. I'll kind of fast forward a little bit after that. I met my now wife in Arizona. We recently moved to Florida, Tampa area about 3 years ago, give or take. And, I'm a real estate investor. I was a realtor for about 6 years while I lived in Arizona. Now I'm currently doing real estate investment. An author. I wrote 1 book. I have another book coming out probably Q1 of next year of 2025. And yeah, I'm a co-host of this podcast, so I'm really excited to be here. And I just love personal development and mindset. That's what the books are about. That's what this podcast is about. And that's what I'm dedicating a lot of my life to. And again, just really happy to be here and grateful for the invitation, man.
Yeah. So you're a student first. That's kind of how the take that I get from you, right? You're always trying to learn. You're always trying to find information. We're sharing information back and forth on text all the time, right? We'll come across this resource or that resource. Hey, have you seen this? I shared a podcast with you yesterday, and you'll do the same back to me, which is why it's so much fun. Our taste might be a little bit different in what we're trying to consume, but at the same time, when you add that flavor in, it really just brings a great mix to the friendship, right? And that's kind of the whole plan with the podcast moving forward. I appreciate you sharing that so much. So personal development has been such a huge pillar for me, and I believe it has for you. That's where even going into the 3 pillars, right? The health, wealth, and legacy. I made that pivot here towards the end of 2024 with the podcast, and I want to continue on that path as well. But we've also developed new framework to go along with those 3 pillars that we're super excited to reveal to you guys today. And it's actually, it's called PEAK, P-E-A-K, the PEAK framework. And we're just going to describe what the PEAK framework is. And as we get further along in this next version of the Rich Mind podcast, we'll start discussing what each of those letters within PEAK. So it's an acronym that can really help you. As I mentioned, I'm trying to figure out ways to help you. If you're an aspiring entrepreneur, if you're out there trying to figure out how to build something, whether it's a website, whether it's launching a podcast, whether it's getting better on social, whether it's Buying real estate. I mean, we're going to talk about that as well. Greg is well versed in the field of real estate. Same thing with buying businesses, right? I know he's done that. It'll be a fun conversation. But the idea is that if any of those topics are sound exciting to you, that's exactly where we're going to go. And the framework of PEAK is how we're going to dive into that. Any thoughts about that before we dive into what the PEAK acronym stands for, Greg?
Yeah, no, I love the framework that you came up with. It's very empowering, and I'm just really looking forward to, like you said, helping out the listeners and putting ourselves in the place of if we were starting out from day one, because we've all been there at day one, right? What does that look like, and how can we help them, advance down that path, wherever that path may lead them? So, I'm excited.
So maybe I'll just throw this in there as well. Folks, if you have questions or if you want to reach out to Greg and I, we've set up brand new emails. We've got a brand new website that launched that we're excited about. We're going to tell you about that here in a little bit. But if you want to reach out to us directly, maybe you have a question, maybe you have a concern, maybe you have some feedback for the podcast, you can reach us at info at richmind.co, and feel free to email us. He and I both will be monitoring that email address, and anything that comes in, we'll be more than happy to try to, whether we answer it directly or if we have a resource, maybe we can share something with you quickly that either we know or someone that we know. We'd be more than happy to try to provide that feedback or that value back to you if you take the time to reach out to us. So I just want to put that out there as well. Definitely want to be here of service, which is it's going to be super exciting. So let's dive into PEAK, man. PEAK. Can you imagine reaching your peak? And I don't think that's you think of it being a destination, right? But to me, it's almost like an aspiration. You aspire to reach your peak. And so when this came to me, I was super excited how we could incorporate that into the framework or the 3 pillars as well. But PEAK, the P for PEAK, is personal development. We've already talked about that several times, right? Personal empowerment, personal development is such a key factor to your growth. If you want to build a business, if you want to become an entrepreneur, you've got to work on yourself. Jim Rohn, early on in my growth stages, was in an audio program I was listening to. He was talking about the harder you work on yourself, the more results you're going to get out there in the real world. And now that's paraphrased. That's not exactly the right quote, but the idea is that the harder I work on me, meaning my thoughts, my ideas, my beliefs, the better my outside results become. And I assume it's been very similar with you too, Greg.
It has, yeah. And that reminds me of your saying, win within, right? Which I love that saying. It's very short and very impactful. But yes, to answer your question, looking inside and doing the inside work. And that actually leads me to a question for you, which I don't think I've ever asked you this, but what year or how long have you been practicing personal development, or what year did you start, I should say?
Great question. So quickly on my story, I was a retail manager into my mid-30s. Thought that was my thing, right? Work grinding every day. Retail is 24/7, 365. So I literally was working every day of the year, even on Christmas, because I had to go in and check the refrigeration, which was no fun. But so fast forward, back prior to the '08 crisis, the Great Recession, I think is how they proclaim it to be these days. But in that time frame, the business I was working for, the company I was working for, had hard times, or was going through hard times, and they were laying off folks, closing stores, and I happened to get caught up in that mess. Meaning, I didn't lose my job, but they closed my store. And when they did that, I realized in that instant that, wow, I am not in control of my life. Meaning, everything I thought up to that point, the working hard, the just doing, the showing up, the sacrifice, I was on salary. And like I said, I was literally working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week at some point. It was brutal. I mean, I was making probably $2-3 an hour. If you did the math, it was awful. So to fast forward a little bit. So when that happened, it was like a slap wake up call that made me realize that I'm not in control and I've got to figure out what to do. And so I ran to the library. That's the only thing I could think of to do. I went to the library. I found the book, Retire Young, Retire Rich by Robert Kiyosaki. And inside of that book, that's where I discovered personal development. Inside of that book, and it's up here on my shelf, folks. I refer to it all the time. Lead the Field. Robert Kiyosaki refers to Earl Nightingale and Lead the Field inside of Retire Rich, Retire Young. And from that moment, I've been hooked because I went out instantly and found I don't think it's this copy because I've burned through several. This is a CD set. I've burned through so many different sets, right? At least 2, maybe 3. But anyways, I was hooked. I listened to it, and I was listening and hearing things that I'd never heard before. So to answer your question, it was probably about that 08, 09, 10 time frame. That is when I first discovered it. And that's been the frustrating part for myself, is prior to that, or it's not frustrating today, but I question all the time, why had no one ever told me any of this stuff? I was learning it brand new, first time ever from anybody, not from school, not from parents, not from family, not from friends, not from coworkers, none of it. And it was almost like it was like out there in broad daylight the whole time, but it just wasn't in my sight. I couldn't see it, which was super frustrating at the time. But yeah, and ever since then, man, Earl Nightingale led me to Jim Rohn, to Napoleon Hill. We just wrapped up a 6-part series talking about some of the success principles within Napoleon Hill, which I'm super excited that came out. But man, it's been a journey, but at the same time, it's been fun, because when you start to take control through personal development, working on yourself, and you start to see some results, like the podcast, like bringing Greg on as a co-host, like communicating with you here, the listener, it's life starts to become fun. You get to be a participant rather than just reacting all the time to all the negative stuff. So anyways, hopefully that, if you have any other questions, that was a long-winded answer to your, I could have just said, I think it was 2009 and just left it at that. But, I didn't do that. So,
No, I love it. The fact that you've been doing this for 15, 16 years.
Yeah.
I'm actually jealous, like you said, because I stumbled upon personal development and mindset summer of 2019. So it's been 5 years. And same thing. I had those thoughts of, how come nobody introduced me to this? Nobody said anything to me about this. And I was 39 years old when I ran across this. So I did have those kind of same feelings, but then at the same time, right now I'm looking back and saying, I'm so grateful that I did run across somebody who knew somebody who said something and led me to the mastermind. And you know what I mean? Because I could still be that person who was, I don't want to say in the dark, but not aware of all this personal development and mindset. And my life would be, I don't even know where it would be, but it probably wouldn't be as great as it is right now. So I just wanted to get a baseline for kind of where we're both starting, which is really interesting.
And that's the beauty of it, is that we can all start from wherever we are. It can start today, right? Folks, you could be listening to us today, and this could be your first experience or even the first thought. You might have just heard Earl Nightingale's Lead the Field for the very first time, like that. You've never even heard of such a thing. Go get that program. I'm telling you, it'll change your life. It changed mine. It absolutely changed my life. And that's the best part, is that if you take it and don't just listen to it, you've got to consume it, meaning you've got to become immersed inside of the message and really try to challenge thoughts, challenge beliefs, question why, and then put things into action. And that kind of maybe moves us on to the next part of the peak framework. And the E for peak is education. And how I always term it on the podcast is self-education, meaning, and I believe this as well, growing up until I discovered this for myself, is that, you go to school, you get through high school, maybe you go to college. You mentioned you went to college out there in Arizona. I went to college for a couple of years. School is not my thing. I'm not wired for that. So I dropped out twice. I didn't think once was good enough, so I actually went back and dropped out again. That's a whole nother story. We won't go down that road. But anyway, so yeah, the self-education, meaning you've got to take it upon yourself, take personal responsibility to educate yourself on topics that we will be talking about here on the podcast, on topics that we've already discussed or that I've discussed, had interviews with on the podcast. I personally believe, and this is where the rich mind comes from, is that if you take control and responsibility for your personal development, along with financial education, you can set yourself up to design whatever life you want. It's really that simple. But if you don't know, like we were just talking about with the personal development piece, same thing with financial education for myself. There were things that I learned inside of that first book of Retire Young, Retire Rich with Robert Kiyosaki that no one had ever shared with me in my entire life. And I was like, where is this? Why am I just now finding this? That's what we want to do. We want to bring that of information to you, the listener, the follower, and help you navigate this thing called life. Build the life you want. Build a legacy you want for you, your family, future generations. That's kind of the whole point. So E is for self-education. What are your thoughts on that?
Obviously, we're both in that same mindset of self-education. It's funny, my dad, he always pushed for education, and, me and my siblings, we all have a college degree, like you mentioned. But even after I was done with college, he would always say, keep learning and educate yourself. And I didn't realize it until after he passed away that he meant self-education, because he was always learning. He was a stock market guy. I'm not really, I'm less of a stock market guy than a real estate guy, I should say. But he was always learning and figuring out strategies. And he was self-educating himself at 70, 80, 80 years old. And it didn't really hit me until, when somebody passes away, you kind of think more about them and what they taught you. So it was really interesting because he was into self-education. He just didn't phrase it that way. So it was real meaningful for me to connect those dots afterwards to know what he was telling me to essentially do. And that's exactly what you're telling, our listeners to do, is to get that education and learn those foundational steps and what you need to do to move your life forward.
So there are basics that if you can just comprehend different terms, right? Wealth, real estate, businesses, they have their own dialogue, their own terms that if you can comprehend what they mean and then apply them into your real life, you can really start making some significant changes relatively quickly. I know I have, and I believe from the conversations you and I have had, Greg, that's happened for yourself as well. Mm-hmm. So I didn't. My father, he did, to my knowledge. Unfortunately, he's passed. It's been a little while now, but he didn't do much self-education. To my knowledge, he was more of a came home, kicked his feet up, turned the sports on, watched whatever basketball game was on at that moment. But anyways, so I wasn't exposed to any of that moving forward. But now it's like, so podcasts, that's why I'm so passionate about doing a podcast, right? Because when I first got started, podcast was the place that I went to learn and consume so much content, so much information. It's amazing, the platform. And so once again, that's why I want to try to give back as much as we possibly can through some self-education. So you're going to find some different free resources at richmind.co. If you head over, that's live now. It's a website we just launched that's going to correspond here with the Rich Mind podcast moving forward. So richmind.co, you're going to find some different resources over there. Go grab them. Take a look at them. Start working on your self-education. And that's where we want to be the go-to source to help you do that, which is super exciting. So let's move into the A. And the A in peak is action. So this is the part that I think that I'll just put me in there. Greg, you can put yourself in there if you want. But as far as you struggle, or I struggle with this sometimes, right? The analysis paralysis, the trying to think that you're not good enough. That's where it stems back to the personal development. The harder I work on myself, the more courage I am to take the action moving forward. But I definitely wanted to make sure that action was part of this framework. You're great at taking action, by the way. You inspire, I've told you that before, you inspire me. The things that you're willing to do for yourself it's really inspiring, which is another reason why I'm super excited to dive into those types of topics here on the podcast. But action, what comes to mind when you think about that for yourself or even for the listener out there?
So this is my favorite word in the acronym here, action, because like you said, and thank you for saying that. I appreciate that. I do take action on a lot of things. There are some things that I definitely procrastinate, and I'm human and it's going to happen. But action it's great because everything else that we're talking about, personal development and education, if you don't do anything with it, then it's just knowledge in your head. And it's, you might be good on Jeopardy, or you might be, smart at a business party or, something like that. But if you're not taking action, you're not going to change your life. Right. And it could be a big change. It could be a small change. It could be incremental. And this is something that I've really hit home with probably in the last 6 months or a year of, am I taking the right action? Am I taking action enough? So there's a lot of questions you can ask yourself around action, but this is my favorite part of peak is action, because we're all afraid to take action at some point. We're all afraid of failure at some point, having that fear. And that's where, like we were talking about, the personal development and knowledge comes in to get over that fear, because we're going to have those failures. doesn't mean we are a failure. It means we have failures, and then retake that action and take it in a different way. So again, action is my favorite word in this whole acronym.
It all starts with the decision. A big mentor of mine is David Nagel. I've mentioned David several times on the podcast. So David Nagel, and search for him as well. He'd be a great resource to help yourself with the mindset piece. But one thing, I was listening to an episode yesterday, and he was talking about, and I've heard him say it many, many times, but sometimes you just hear it in different ways, which just is why it's so neat to kind of listen to podcasts at different times. But until you make the decision, you've got to make the decision first. You can't worry about the how. That's like the podcast. For example, when I launched the podcast, I didn't know what I was doing, man. I had no idea. I didn't know, you know what I mean? Which software, which microphone, I had no idea. But I made the decision, and I just wanted to put that in there with the action. If you decide that you're going to move towards a specific goal, the decision comes first. The how will start to show up as you start to take that action, the inspired action, the right people, the right resources. Once again, that's why we want to help try to be that resource for you moving forward with this inspired action. And yes, I agree. Action is a big piece of that for myself too. I love that. So yeah, as I mentioned, man, you're great at taking action. You inspire me sometimes. I need to take more action. I said it on the recording we did the last time, the interview, right? I'm always thinking, okay, what would Greg do at this moment? And I'm always trying to think, okay, how would he interact, or how would he deal with this situation? And sometimes I definitely try to role play that out of my mind before I move forward. So I definitely appreciate that. That's super cool. So let's move into the final, the K. So the K is knowledge. Okay. And I want to put a little spin on that. I want to put it with wisdom and inspiration. So it kind of is a little bit of a parallel with the personal development piece, but there is so much wisdom in Earl Nightingale, Jim Rohn, Robert Kiyosaki. I know he's still with us today as far as he's still living, but as far as the wisdom that he's sharing, you need to go find inspiration, wisdom, people that will resonate with you with wherever you're at in your journey. There's certain people that will resonate at certain times, depending on where you're at. There might be some topics that Greg and I discuss here on this podcast that you might not be ready for it yet, or you might not be, or it might not be far enough for you, depending on where you're at in your journey. It really just depends. But seeking out that knowledge and that wisdom from others has been super crucial for me, on top of the personal development piece, on top of the self-education piece, on top of taking action. Seeking out that wisdom and knowledge has been a lot of fun. It's been a little frustrating. I mentioned a little bit, right? Trying to understand and comprehend things that I've never been discussed or never been exposed to before. But it's been a lot of fun. What are your thoughts on the knowledge piece?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head with the continuous learning. Because this is something that I've realized there's not like you said, the peak, right? You get to the peak and then you're done. You're not like enlightened and you're all knowing, and, because there's going to be another peak. There's another mountain that you need to climb, whether it's business or health or relationships. There's a million peaks out there. So, getting to the peak is great. But there's always something that you can learn and take from, like you said, like a podcast. Even if you think you're very well versed in one area of personal development, continue to learn, because different perspectives from other people are going to spark an idea in your head that, like, oh, I didn't think about that. Randy said something that made me think of, going down this path, and it'll take you on a wild journey. And a lot of it is really fun. Like you said, sometimes it can be a little frustrating because sometimes you're trying to implement an idea and you don't implement it fast enough or the way you would like. But again, it's just learning, and that's where the personal and personal development comes from. It's all personal. It's going to hit you differently than it's going to hit me. And I know, like you mentioned, there's a few podcasters that, we mention to each other, and you're like, I'm not really, feeling that guy, or it doesn't really hit me.
Exactly.
So it works for me, but it doesn't work for Randy. All right, cool. Like it's not a big deal because it does work for me, and I can listen to that, that person maybe 6 months from now, maybe the same episode, and it'll hit me a little bit differently because I'm 6 months wiser. I'm 6 months in the future, whatever you want to call it. So just that continuous learning piece it's crucial for personal development.
So going back to the whole contrast between yourself and myself, right? The way we look at things, you'll have different resources than I have that we'll share as we continue to create and build out the Rich Mind brand and the Rich Mind podcast. It's going to be a lot of fun. So yeah, that knowledge piece is It's fun. And so here, maybe this might be a little bit of a tip for you folks. This helped me. This is what I did early on in my journey. Greg asked me as far as when I started. And yeah, you're right. It's been 15 years ago. Wow. When I think about that, I should be further ahead. No, I'm just kidding. No judgment, right? But the idea, though, is that when I started down this journey, every time I was exposed to like the Earl Nightingales lead the field, I made the decision back then. So like I said a minute ago, nothing happens until you make a decision. I made the decision for myself. Every time I was exposed to a new idea or a new thought or a new resource, I just went and got it. I didn't worry about what it costs. I mean, I wasn't spending thousands and thousands of dollars, but if somebody had a course that was $20, $30, let's say less than 100, but a lot of times it's free, right? Listening to the podcast is free. So somebody would mention an episode on a podcast and I'd be like, okay, I would just go search them right now. So like I mentioned with David Nagel, his is the Successful Mind podcast. Go search that. Go find that podcast. Dive in. It might be potentially a little bit over your head, depending on where you're at in your level of personal development, but you might be in the exact right place at the right time to hear his message and take your life to an exponential level, reaching towards this peak that we're trying to help you do here on the Rich Mind podcast. So anyways, that was just another tip that I started doing, and I still do it to this day. Greg, you bring things to me all the time, meaning you'll share a resource, and unless I'm like really tied up, that's the beauty of having a phone, right? You don't have to like do much as far as like click a link and go here and check this out, right? You can do some research really quickly these days. Back in the day, it wasn't as easy. Cell phones were just beginning to be a thing. But at the same time, yeah, just take that action, take that inspired action, and the right things will show up at the right time when you need it. And that's how it's been for me. And once again, I assume it's been similar for you as well.
Yeah, no, it definitely has. I couldn't have said it better myself, Randy. So that was perfect, man.
Well, fantastic. Well, folks, I think we're going to bring this one in for a close today. We're super excited. A little bit of a teaser for the next episode. Personal development, self-help books, they're a waste of time, right? Aren't they a waste of time, Greg? What do you think? Do you think self-help books are a waste of time?
I don't know. I guess we'll find out next episode, huh?
So if you've caught this episode up to this point, you might be able to realize that maybe that's not how we believe. So we are going to dive into that subject. We found something or a resource that we're going to share with you that challenges that thought. And so that's kind of what we want to do. We want to have a little bit of a discussion about how we believe and what we think, and maybe share some resources for you moving forward. So go out there, as I mentioned, head over to richmind.co, and we'll have the links in the show notes. You can email us. I mentioned that earlier as well. info@richmind.co. Let us know what you think. Let us know some thoughts. Give us some feedback. The great way, or another great way to give us some feedback, would be to go out to the podcast platform of your choice. We're all over the place. We are on the Apple, Spotify, YouTube Music. There's dozens more. We're actually on YouTube as well. Currently, it's under at Randy Wilson on YouTube, but you can find the Rich Mind podcast there as well. Leave us a review. Leave us some feedback. We would greatly appreciate and let us know where you are in your journey, and that email to us would be fantastic as well. So go out there. Focus on being great. We look forward to coming back and having a little bit of a discussion about self-help books. That's got to be a waste of time, right? That's going to be fun, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. All right, folks. We'll talk to you real soon for the next episode. Check that out. We're going to be coming out every Tuesday and Thursday. So this one's going to launch on a Tuesday. So check us out Thursday morning. And we'll come back and have another great conversation. We look forward to it. Have a great day. Bye now.
Thank you for joining us today on the Rich Mind podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please like and share it with someone you know. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Rich Mind podcast on your favorite platform and never miss an episode. Want to dive deeper into transforming your financial mindset? Visit our website to download your free 5-step guide titled From Dead-End Job to Entrepreneurial Freedom, designed to help you conquer your fears and start on your entrepreneurial path with confidence. One last thing. Don't ever forget that your mind is the first place where wealth is created. Keep dreaming big, take action, and together, let's build wealth, a legacy, and a life we love. Until next time.